Welcome back again. And by now you will have watched the demonstrations. I want you to realize that although those demonstrations look a little complex and like, oh my God, all these things are going on, I don't think I can do this and so on, actually the process is very, very easy. Now there are two reasons why there's one reason why I gave you two demonstrations on that. And that's because I want to show you the progressive nature of this. You can do very small amounts with this, especially at the beginning when you're a little bit shyer about hypnosis. And then you can start adding more and more things and do some pretty sophisticated versions of hypnosis, but all based on some pretty simple ideas and some simple processes that are stacked on top of each other. So let's just break down a little bit what we did there. We started off, once again, with the hypnotic context, as we always do. Then we moved on from the hypnotic context into our first warm-up cycle. Remember the ABS formula? Got the hypnotic context. The A stands for absorb attention. So we went through those cycles of absorbing the attention again, just as you see me do in other demonstrations already. Now, as we went through the cycle, the closing the eyes, the gathering attention, the breathing, and the comfort, and so on, I learned something of great value about my client, my volunteer in this point. I learned that relaxation, which is a pretty standard thing to be using in hypnosis, is not a good idea in this case. Why? Because for him, relaxation, or at least too much relaxation, is coupled with something negative, which is a headache. And you recall, we said right at the beginning of this training program, as soon as anything negative begins to happen, stop it. Bring them back, have a chat, and only bring them back into these hypnotic processes to the extent that you can avoid whatever the problem stimulus was. So in this case, the problem stimulus is relaxation. I must avoid relaxation at all costs. Now you'll notice that I'm so trained to relax people as part of the approach I do, because it's a very nice thing overall, that on occasion I made a slip up. I slip into relaxation and then I have to correct myself and say, no, actually, just stick with comfort instead. So it's actually okay to make mistakes. You can make mistakes, move on from the mistakes, and actually focus back onto what you're doing. It can be relatively forgiving if you move along in these processes. Now, the next thing we did is, so we've got the hypnotic context set up, we had a little chat, we did the progressive attention gathering, and we did each step one at a time again. Why did I do that? Well, once again, he's a new client, and I'm taking him through each of those steps so that I can judge at each step how well he's doing. I can fractionate the trances, make them a little bit deeper each time. And he's slowly going on that journey with me. And I know he's going with me because each time it's a bit deeper. His responses are a bit stronger. You could see him having more effort to come back each time, which means he was at some level a little deeper or more removed from his normal state of consciousness with each iteration, which is great. It makes my life a lot easier. Now we get into the important part. Up to this point, it's pretty much standard fare. We've been doing this all along already. So what is new in the next part? Well, now we're getting into the B part of the ABS formula, bypass the critical factor. Now this is where it gets very interesting because there's many maneuvers that you can have to bypass the critical factor. The one I used here is very sly and it's very subtle. However, it is also very powerful. The way we're bypassing the critical factor here is very simply by overloading the critical factor with too many tasks. Let me explain what I mean by that. The mind requires energy. Your body eats glucose, the glucose goes into your brain, feeds the nerve cells, they get turned into little electrical signals, and so on. Without that glucose, you start feeling sluggish, your brain slows down, you can't think straight anymore, and if anyone's ever had some kind of a glucose rush or a sugar dump, you know what I'm talking about. It becomes very difficult to think and make clear decisions and so on. Now, we can fatigue the supply of glucose temporarily by simply making the person make choices and focus on subtle distinctions. The more choices someone makes, the more that critical factor, that resistance starts eroding because energy is being used up to make those choices. The more subtle distinctions someone has to make, the more the critical factor erodes because each little distinction has to be evaluated, judged, denied, or accepted. And once again, that tends to erode the resistance to some degree. Now, these requests all seem very innocent. Well, is this more or less? Does that increase it or decrease it? Does it make you feel more comfortable or less? Is your head tilted more to the left or more to the right? These are all choices where he has to literally have a sense of where am I, and it's actually quite a delicate decision to come to. Because of this, it's exhausting the critical factor more and more, and becoming more and more hypnotic as a result. So we get more attention. His critical factor is being more exhausted, which means the kind of things that were maybe a little bit resistant at the beginning are eroding by layers, and suddenly the unconscious mind has freedom to express. How do we get those expressions? Well, we had 2 demonstrations. The first demonstration, we only played with the head tilt. Notice how the first time he did the head tilt was a very conscious movement. He moved probably about half an inch or so. Small by everyday amounts, but huge in terms of trance processes. So I had him do it again, this time even smaller than that, until you just saw a little motion. The time I was satisfied is when he moved his head such a small degree that I could barely tell he'd actually moved it. Then I know he's really into a very subtle layer. More energy is being expended on the subtleties, making that evaluation. And, very importantly, the unconscious mind has freedom to start expressing itself, because to make very small movements, well, they're actually very difficult to do consciously. The conscious mind likes big, brash movements. The unconscious mind tends to make smaller, jerkier, simpler movements. So by reducing what's required of him and increasing the amount of, shall we say, intellectual content that he's got to evaluate, it's actually tying up his intellectual processes on the evaluation side of things. And by reducing the movement side of things, it's promoting the unconscious mind to step in and take it over for him, to free his conscious mind up to do that evaluating job, which is actually very tricky for him to do. Now, I know it succeeded, because when he came back, what did he say? Well, the left side was actually very comfortable, but I really didn't like moving to my right side. And here's the key thing. I didn't expect that to happen. I was surprised by it. If it's surprising to him, then by definition it's unconscious. There is no conscious volition involved. We've learned something about this. I've also learned, in terms of the hypnosis that I'm doing, that I'm going to be staying clear of the right head tilt for a while, and hope is, in case that it actually happened, that it would fix itself. But I also know that there's a contraindication that if I start getting him to start tilting it more and more to the right, I run a risk that I'm going to take him to some negative place. So you may have noticed that the second time around, when we did the exercise again, I didn't mention the right head tilt at all. Once again, like the relaxation, I'm avoiding those situations that may cause a problem. Now, if I was a therapist, I might very well start exploring that. But we're not doing therapy here. We're doing practice. And in practice, especially when you have less experience, you want to be making sure that you avoid any kind of context that might open up the doorway to having to do therapy. So by being respectful to him, we shifted context. So let's just make a summary of what we've come to so far. We've had the attention-absorbing processes, and we've done a pretty good job with them. Now we're going to the bypassing of the critical factor. We're going to use a specific kind of trance, which a friend of mine calls a somatic trance. Somatic means of the body. We're using a body trance in order to get his intellect all tied up in a way that allows the unconscious mind to express itself. We're going to start exhausting the critical factor by making it do fine choices, fine evaluations, careful distinctions. And in exhausting it by doing these different questions constantly, it'll get to the point where we can't quite hold on to the same kind of critical thinking that normally gets in the way. At that point, the unconscious mind starts to express itself more and more. We can tell that in the quality of the movement. You'll see that there are smaller, little jerkier movements versus the smoother, conscious movements. In time, if I would chose to explore that road, by the way, just so you know, we could turn those unconscious movements into very smooth, natural movements also, but it goes to that little jerky stage first. It's important to realize this because when you see the quality of movement change, you know the unconscious mind has stepped in and taken over for a bit. That tells me I'm ready to bring him back, to debrief him, and then move on to the more important process, which we'll talk about in a moment. There's one last step that we put into this whole process, even that very first induction, that I'd like you to know about. And that is, we started to focus on doing a certain task, tilt your head, move it back, tilt your head, move it back, always coming back to center because his body knows where to rebalance a little bit. The next thing we did, after exhausting his critical factor, his intellect for a while, what do we say? Just sit back and rest for a while. With a different client, I might just say, sit back and relax. Don't do anything. You see, what happens here is it becomes a natural deepener. He's just exhausted his mind to some extent doing something, and now it's, don't do anything. Okay. What a relief. That relief is the unconscious mind taking over again and resetting everything. But of course, now we've already got a trance context, and we've encouraged the unconscious mind to take over more because the conscious mind is sitting back in relief going like, enough effort now, I get to rest a little bit. That is a perfect opportunity for the unconscious mind to reset, take over more ground, so when we re-engage afterwards, it becomes even more active. It's exactly what you saw happening. So now let's turn to the second demonstration of that somatic trance, of the way that we bypass the critical factor by giving the conscious mind a lot of details to try and hold on to, and a lot of choices, fine distinctions, to exhaust this choice-making or evaluating mechanism. The second trance was identical, really the same attention-shifting process, the same kind of paying attention to your body and the tilting and the choice and so on. Only this time, we worked with the hands. We had them rest on his lap, separated, because I know I'm going to start playing with the hands now. Now, the instructions were to lift the hand and return it, but so slightly that he's barely aware he's moving it. Now, we've already taught him how to do this with his head tilts. He's gone from big tilts to just tiny little shifts, but they feel very significant because everything is amplified inside. So I know the context has already been laid for this. And now I'm getting him to do the same thing with a hand. Now, those of you who've got a little more experience will realize I'm going for a hand levitation or a hand catalepsy. I'm looking for automatic movement. It's one of these deep trance phenomena you may have heard about that a lot of people are afraid to do. It's actually very easy to get. So by training his hand to do this, but to do it in very small movements, so rather than having big movements like this, they are barely perceptible movements, it re-engages the same cycle. The unconscious mind must take over because these are movements the conscious mind doesn't quite know how to handle or control. It doesn't sit there and move a tiny fraction. It moves big. You want a glass of water? You move your whole arm. You don't just move a tiny fraction of something. So the unconscious mind constantly expresses itself with these tiny little movements, micro-expressions in the face, micro-expressions in the body, and so on. So we're encouraging the unconscious mind to do that. But now in a direction of the arm levitation or the arm catalepsy that we want. I am confusing his critical factor again by giving a choice, left hand, right hand, which is going to happen, which one doesn't want to happen. And because I've already exhausted his critical factor up to this point with lots of other suggestions, lots of other questions, lots of other choices, at this point, he's not even thinking to analyze, well, maybe it won't lift at all. He's just going with it and going like, well, I guess, yeah, this one wants to do a little bit more. He's not even analyzing the question fully. He's just going with the implication of that question. So it's very important. So there he is, practicing lifting that hand. Now, one of two things can happen. You can start lifting it, and on the suggestion that it will continue to lift, it will just start levitating by itself. That could very easily have happened. I offered the possibility. His mind didn't take it. Am I now suddenly afraid because I failed? No, not in the least, because I can see all the classic catalepsy things going on. Everything is working exactly as it should. So then I give him another experiment. I'm going to touch your hand, and I'm going to lift it, and just see what happens to your experience inside. Notice, his focus is off what the hand is doing and what his experience is doing. He's off evaluating something else, not the hand, which means the hand will automatically just rest there cataleptically while he's trying to sort through his feelings. Does this feel better or not? Now we've got a catalepsy, and he's already practiced a little bit of motion. Well, now getting automatic motion is easy. Once again, we gave him the choice, up or down. It started choosing down. Then we added in left and right to make it even more choices. At this point, his conscious mind's overwhelmed. I have no idea what's going to happen. Well, of course he doesn't. That's what we want. We want his unconscious mind to do all the work for us. So there he is. His hand's up in the air and is floating around. And we're coming towards the end of the session, so I'm asking him to return the hand. And this is the beautiful part. His hand's not moving. What does that tell me? Well, he's clearly listening to suggestions. You've been getting on head nods. He's responding in that sense. He's been a very good subject or volunteer so far. So really what's happening is his mind thinks he's already moving the hand down. He's getting a hypnotic hallucination of movement whilst the hand is still cataleptic. I have a 2-for-1 offer here. Did I know that's going to happen? No. I'm just never assuming anything about what's happening until I ask the client afterwards. Now, this is very important for you because you could have thought to yourself, oh, maybe I'm failing right now because the hand's not returning as quickly. Never make any evaluation about what happened until you've checked with the client and then they tell you what their experience is. And very often the experience has been much more hypnotic than you realize from looking to the outside. This is a crucial stage in your development as a hypnotist. You're gathering feedback from your clients so you can start predicting how people are feeling whilst you do trances later on that are much more official. It'll feel like you're inside their mind then because you can read their signals so much more clearly than other people. So we had all that catalepsy going on, the hand came back down, and the most important thing happens again. I must debrief the client. I must find out what happened. How did you feel? How did you interpret those feelings? How did you evaluate the things going on? How does your mind work? How does your mind think? Now, in doing that, I got all kinds of extra bonus. The idea of his head tilted to the right and starting to heal whatever limitation was built into his neck at that point. That's great. Now, his motivation has increased to come back and explore even more. I haven't had to do anything formal yet. We're just exploring. We're just doing an experiment. We're just helping with my research. But he's now very motivated to come back for more of this because he's learning about himself. He's learning about his body. He's learning about how his mind operates. He's fixing problems he didn't even know he had, and he's very grateful about that. He's very happy that those things are happening. So now I have a volunteer that's gone from being a happy volunteer to being an ecstatic volunteer. Someone who's going to stand in the front of the queue to say, please, can I be next again? And that's what you want. Because you see, now getting volunteers and doing more practice becomes easier and easier. He'll go home, he'll talk to his friends and say, oh, this is the most amazing thing. My hand was there and I thought I put it down in my lap, but it was up. Now, your reputation as a hypnotist has skyrocketed. And how many risks did you take? None. Zero. This stuff will always happen in one way or another. You just have to let go of the need to make it happen like this right now. Let whatever happens emerge. Give them choices, but make sure something does emerge and constantly come back and constantly gather feedback. In that fractionation process, do something, experience something, feedback something, do something more, experience something more, feedback something more. That cycle is going to make the hypnosis more and more profound as you continue. Pretty soon, you'll be doing some really deep, really powerful trances, and it'll be easy to you. That's what we're going to be heading to next. So, now you have almost the whole picture. We have the hypnotic context, how to set the scene to make it easy. We have the attention gathering processes to start focusing the mind and open the doorway to trance. We now have the critical factor bypasses, which are basically ways of exhausting the guardian, putting him to sleep so the gate stays wide open and allows things in. Now we come to the final stage in the hypnotic process, which is the S, stimulating the unconscious. In the next few videos, the finals in the sequence, we'll talk a little bit about that and how we can use this to explore trance and to grow yourself in your skills as a hypnotist.